Good morning, you all. It is my joy to be here. I was just thinking during that music, I love being together on a Sunday morning with God's family, and I especially like being here with you all. This feels like instead of being your guest, I feel like your most absent family member. So just grateful to be here with you all. And to kick off this Christmas invitation series, I just want to draw attention, if you haven't seen it, to the giving tree that's out there by the coffee. It's an opportunity for you to share your treasure with people here, near, and far. And I just want to encourage you that there's no gift too small. God's been using small gifts for a long time to do big things, right? He used a boy's lunch. He used a widow's mite. He used 5 stones. He used a jawbone. He's used a cup of water. He's used all kinds of things to accomplish his goals. He's just looking for us to be willing and available to be a vessel for that. And I think one of my favorite stories about a small gift that God used to make a big difference was it was a Christmas season, and I was in Mexico. My family and I lived there for 15 years as missionaries, and we had a team of people visiting from Indiana, and I was giving them a little talk about generosity and how God might want to use the things that they have in their hands to impact a world out there that still needs to know who he is. And I was saying to them, think about what you're good at. Like, what kinds of things are you good at? And ask how God could use what you're good at for the kingdom. And there was a 10-year-old boy sitting in the front row who did not want to be there. And he interrupted me, raised his hand, and said, "I'm not really good at anything. Can I go, please?" And I said, I had 4 sons, and so he was not intimidating me. And I said, I'm sure you're good at something. I'm sure you have something in your hand that you can give to the Lord. I'm sure that he's gifted you in some way. You can give your gift back to him. And he's like, I'm not very good at anything. And I said, come on, you've got to be good at something. And he looked at me, he goes, Xbox. I was like, okay, well, ask God what he might do with your Xbox. And he stayed and listened for the rest of my time together with him. And then he went back to Indiana, and I lost track of him. But just a few weeks after that, the Mason, Ohio back-to-back office got a letter from him that he had written to us with a $410 cashier's check inside. He had gone back to his elementary school and hosted an Xbox tournament that had a $10 entry fee, and he'd gotten some little businesses to donate prizes, and there were 41 participants. So he wrote me this letter about exactly where he wanted his $410 to be spent. And at the bottom of it, he said, I guess God can use an Xbox after all. And I think if God can use a 10-year-old and an Xbox, there is no telling what he can do in a room full of like this. With the talents and treasure and opportunities and giftings he's given you, let's advance the kingdom in a world that still needs to know him. That really is the Christmas invitation. But we'll be spending our time this morning continuing in the book of Luke. We'll be in the first 5 verses of chapter 14. You can read along with me that first verse. It says, Now it happened, as he went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath, that they watched him closely. And there's lots of details in this verse. First of all, lots of Jesus' ministry happened around meals. Think about wedding ceremonies and Last Suppers and meals with Mary and Martha and meals with Mary Magdalene. Jesus often centered his ministry around meals, which makes sense to me. Because when we sit down to share a meal with someone, we listen, we connect, we engage, we exchange, there's like a moment where we send a message to whomever it is we're sitting with, you're important to me. I hope last week at Thanksgiving you had a chance to sit and connect and listen and engage with the people in your life. But one of my favorite things about Jesus is he does not just sit and have meals with the people that are exactly like him, that tell him exactly what he wants to hear. But he sits down and has meals regularly with people that don't have any idea who he is and don't have any desire to understand, and who actually, in this particular case, are looking to catch him doing the wrong thing. It says the verb that he says when it talks about they were watching him closely, that verb in the Greek is paratero, paratero means like watching with the intent to catch someone at something, which is different than the verb to watch, which means to look at something with curiosity. We know the difference, right? I just mentioned we have 10 children, but the youngest 4 of those 10 are currently teenage boys. So I know what it looks like to watch them with curiosity. That's like, are you really going to eat that entire pizza? Like, I'm just kind of like, wow, I can't believe you're capable of that. And then the other kind of watching them with the intent of catching them is when my eyes are a little squinted and my head's kind of cocked and I'm thinking, do you really think you're going to jump off that balcony? You know, like I'm watching them, anticipating that what they're about to do, I don't want them to do, and I'm going to catch them in the act. That's the kind of verb that they use in this particular passage. These Pharisees invited Jesus to a meal. His heart was listen, connect, engage, exchange. Their heart was to catch him doing something wrong. But I love that even in the midst of him knowing the trap they were setting for him, that he operated in total freedom. That's the way God works. Jesus demonstrates for us during the years of his ministry that he can be free no matter where he is, no matter who's around him, and no matter what they're saying. He has that freedom. He actually is freedom. It's a confidence. And as his children, he gives that confidence right back to us. We have that same kind of confidence to do exactly what God wants us to, no matter where it is that we find ourselves. That confidence comes, that freedom comes when we spend time with and alongside that freedom or confidence giver. There's this passage in Exodus 33:11. I like it a lot. It's this passage where it talks about Moses walking into some place called the tent of the meeting. And the tent of the meeting is a place where it says that the Lord talked to Moses face to face as one would a friend. And that verse gets a lot of attention because of that particular passage, because it's so fascinating to think about. That we could be in a place where the King of the universe wants to talk to us face to face as one would a friend. In the time of Moses, he had to go into a geographical spot where God was located. But today, with the gift of the Holy Spirit, we can be anywhere we want to and have the tent of the meeting. We can have a tent of the meeting in our car, and we can have a tent of the meeting in the middle of a crowd, and we can be in the tent of the meeting while we're exercising or at work or at a table with someone that we don't really want to be at. Like, we can have that experience where we're face to face with God in the midst of whatever storyline we find ourselves in. That passage gets a lot of attention because of that face-to-face concept. But the part I like the best is the part that comes after it. It says Moses goes into the tent of the meeting where he meets with the Lord face-to-face as one would a friend. And then he goes back down the mountain so he can deliver to his people, to God's people, the message God had just given him. But it goes on to say, but Joshua, the young son of Nun, followed Moses into the tent and didn't leave. He stayed there. He was so captivated by what it looked like to be face-to-face with the Lord, he didn't want to leave. And if you turn your Bibles a couple books later, you read all the incredible storylines, the confidence that God gave Joshua to do things like march around a city 7 times before the walls came down, or go with his buddy Caleb into a land like a spy. Like, God gave Joshua all this incredible freedom and confidence to do exactly what he called him to do. And I would argue, I don't think he would have had that if he hadn't spent that face-to-face time as one would the friend. Jesus is setting something up for us in this story. He on purpose visited them on the Sabbath. He on purpose visited the Pharisees. He on purpose is going to do what he's about to do. Like, he doesn't tell stories accidentally. He is the living gospel. He is telling us, if you want to know and see what the good news is, watch me. I am the good news. Follow me, imitate me. In fact, Paul would later write in 2 Corinthians this verse about how we are living letters. That we may be the only gospel that somebody sees, that God writes his truth right onto our hearts so that we can live the gospel out in front of other people who might not have any other access to it. It says, you are the epistle written in our hearts, known and read by all men. Clearly, you're an epistle of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of flesh, that is, of the heart. Wherever we go, whatever table we find ourselves in, wherever we listen and connect and exchange and engage, we have to keep in mind, as Jesus was in this very table, that somebody who didn't know the good news was maybe interacting with the good news for the very first time, and we have to be mindful of it. I was speaking about a month or so ago somewhere, and I had made arrangements with the people who were organizing the event that when I was all done speaking, I was going to go out behind the stage and out the door and go straight and leave the premises right away. I had another commitment I had to go to. So I finished talking and I walked out the back door. And when I stepped outside, it was dark. There was no lights in the back of the building. And so I just took a minute to kind of orient myself in the dark to remember which direction is my car parked. And as I was standing out there in the dark, the door opened behind me and I couldn't see who it was, but I heard a voice say out, "Mrs. G, is that you?" And as soon as I heard her voice, I had this moment, like this tent of the meeting kind of moment with the Lord, where he he put this name in my head, and I went, Biani Briones, is that you? 25 years ago, I was an ESL teacher in the Sycamore School District, and I taught specifically in the Sims Elementary Building. And Biani Briones was a 6-year-old first grader whose first language was not English and who was one of my favorite students. I hadn't heard her voice in over 25 years. I should not have recognized her adult woman's voice. As soon as the Lord put that name in my heart, I knew he did it as a gift to her and to me. And I spun around when I said her name, and she started crying because she's like, I didn't even think you'd remember me, let alone would you recognize me. And I said, Biani, tell me what's going on. God has something for us in this moment. Tell me, how have you been? She went on to tell me a little bit about her life and told me that she had come to know the Lord here in Cincinnati through a Pentecostal church. And she's like, the first time they laid hands on me and prayed over tongues, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is what Mrs. G used to do. And I said, well, I was actually just speaking in English, but I'm glad you understand what it was. I used to pray over my students when they left my room. They couldn't tell on me because they didn't speak English. So I would pray over them before they left. I would ask God to protect them and provide for them and to find favor with their teachers and to grant them understanding of the language. And we would have these little moments where they just knew to stand still and listen while I prayed over them, and then they left my room. That experience, the next time she went into the tent of the meeting, this time of her own volition, she remembered what it felt like to be in the presence of God, but she didn't even know what it was. I said, Biani, do you understand that God has been in pursuit of you for more than 2 decades, that he loves you? It goes on in that passage to say, at that table, that Pharisee table on Sabbath where they were eating bread, that behold, there was a certain man before Jesus, who had dropsy. So dropsy really means inflammation of the face with water. That's literally what it means in Greek. If you had dropsy, you had a very bloated face. It was obvious immediately to the eye that there was something wrong. There was something physically wrong. This is where the trap begins to get laid for Jesus, because of course it is Sabbath, and there were laws saying that on the Sabbath they couldn't do things like heal. And I think when Jesus looked around that table, he saw more healing that needed to happen than just dropsy. Sometimes all we see are physical ailments. But the Lord understands all that's going on in our hearts. He understands the scars that can be seen and the scars that can't be seen. In fact, with my work with orphans and vulnerable children, most of the scars that I encounter in the children that we serve, you can't recognize from just seeing them. But God sees every one of them, and he has always had more than one mission going on at a time. He saw that man with dropsy, and I know he knew in his heart what he was about to do, but he was also trying to heal at the same time the broken thinking of the Pharisees who set the trap. That when God does his good news, good work in the midst of us, that he has multifacets, places and ways all around of people that are being impacted. And sometimes today what he asks us for is he asks that we would be our partner with him in that kind of healing. That when we sat at tables with people, when we listen and engage and exchange and connect, that we not only look for people who have the physical need of God's healing touch, but that we'd have our eyes trained so we could partner with him to be part of the healing of people who might need encouragement or comfort or God's wisdom or discernment or the gift of peace. Things that he wants to give us so that we may give them away. Todd and I adopted a teenage boy several years ago. His name's Tyler. And when you impart in an international adoption, there's no due date. You don't know exactly when they're going to come home. You have a couple of years most of the time for that process to unfold. And so you have to keep making plans for life like you always do. And so we had made a family vacation plan. And we had no idea that 30 days before that vacation, Tyler would come home to live with us here in Cincinnati. So I'm just saying that all to say that it's not really a good idea to take your brand new child who's a teenager on a vacation without predictable routine and where you have no lifelines. But off we went on vacation a month after Tyler got here. And we went to Colorado, which he'd never been to Colorado. So every day was full of new experiences. He was riding horses for the first time, and he was fishing in rivers for the first time, and climbing mountains for the first time. And most of the week actually went really well. It was without incident. I was surprised. But the very last night, the boys were all playing this big game of Monopoly. And they were trading properties and pass and go and taxing each other. And it was getting kind of rowdy. And he didn't understand all the language. And as one little incident happened and they were laughing, he took it as they were laughing at him. They weren't laughing at him, but he didn't understand. And he was overtired and overstimulated, and the whole thing fell apart. And he began to get upset and then cry. And so he and I just excused him from the table, and we went to his room. I knew he was exhausted from that week. And I just helped him lay down. And I said, let's just go to bed tonight. Tomorrow is a new day. And so I was positive when I walked out of the room, he'd be asleep in 2 minutes. But not my best mom moment. An hour later, one of my sons came upstairs. He's like, hey, you know Tyler's down there still crying, right, in his bed? And I was like, I did not know that. So I went down to his room to see what was going on. And when you begin to cry about an incident, what can happen in our hearts and our brains is he began to grieve things that had nothing to do with Monopoly, right? He began to grieve his life and his transition and all kinds of things. And so me telling him, like, hey, next time you can buy a hotel for Park Place wasn't going to solve the problem. Like, this was about something now way bigger. And so the only thing I could do was be there with him. And I was just sat there with him and rubbed his back and told him all the things that were true, like, we love you and we're not going anywhere and we came for you and it's going to be okay. And I just repeated all those words, I love you and I'm not leaving, and until he finally calmed down and fell asleep. The next day on our way home, we were at the airport, and my husband circled everybody up, and he made everybody tell us what our favorite moment of vacation was. And all the rest of my children all named the kinds of things that we spent money on, right? Activities that it cost us something. And we were all very excited to hear what Tyler was going to say, because every single day and every single activity we did was brand new to him. So it was like, what's he going to say was his favorite? Did he like catching that fish better? Did he like riding a chairlift better? Like, what did he like? And so when it was his turn, Todd said, Tyler, what was your favorite moment of the week? And he goes, oh, that's easy. My favorite moment of the week is when Mom told me how much she loved me last night. And I realized in that moment, my gosh, the opportunity we have on a daily basis to just say the things that are true to the people that are sitting around our dinner tables, to the people that we make a choice to engage and exchange and connect and listen to. God wants to open up the opportunity for his love and mercy and kindness and goodness to come through us to the people that he loves. It goes on to say in verse 3, so they're at Sabbath, they're eating bread, they're watching them closely. There's a guy there with dropsy. Jesus answers, speaking to the lawyers and the Pharisees, saying, is it lawful? Is it okay, do you think, for us to heal on the Sabbath? And in that moment, when he asked that question, he took the weapon they were trying to use on him and he turned it around and used it on them. Because the truth of the matter is, everybody knew they couldn't heal anybody. They were incapable of healing, and immediately he was establishing himself as the healer. And then if they said, yes, it's okay to heal on the Sabbath, they look like they're lawless. And if they say, no, it's not okay to heal on the Sabbath, then they look heartless. And Jesus, he cut through all of that confusion and all of that nuance and all of that complication, like he does in every single storyline, with a simple appeal to love. If you ever find yourself in a story where it feels like you're not exactly sure, what's the right response here? What should I do? What is God requiring of me? What do I take my step to the left or the right? Isaiah would say, like what do I do? Whenever you find yourself in any kind of circumstance or relational quandary or spiritual conundrum, always ask yourself, what would Jesus do? What Jesus would do would take the route through it by way of love. He always appeals to love. It clarifies our plan of action. And so as I was studying this, I was trying to think of a real life example of a moment when I found myself in a quandary and I wasn't sure exactly like what is the right thing to do. Not like this is the right thing to do and I just don't want to do it, but like I'm not actually sure what the right thing to do is. How can we apply, what's the one story in my life when I have applied God's law of love to that kind of circumstance? And I thought of a pretty personal one. So this isn't like something I like go around and share on the pulpit very often, but this again feels a bit like my living room and you all like my extended family. So I'll just tell you the truth. Todd and I were living in Mexico, and my daughter was a Mexican gymnast, which meant if you have ever had a child compete at a national level in athletics, it's like, consumes your whole life. So she was at the gym all the time, every night. And our family routine was that I would take her to the gym in the afternoon and my husband would pick her up from the gym in the evening. And also, if you've ever been involved in athletics of any kind, there's usually especially I'm speaking to you women, there's kind of like a team mom kind of club, like the people that are like, you know what I'm talking about, like that's like their thing. And the gymnastics moms were precious and kind and were never unkind to me. But I was on the outside of that. I was a foreigner. I was different than them. And so they would be kind to me, but really I was not a part of their social circle. And it was okay with me. I became friends with someone else who had been kind of pushed out of that social circle. She was pushed out because the women, frankly, were just intimidated by her. She was a very beautiful woman. She was a model in our city, and her image was on a bunch of billboards around town. And I think they just were uncomfortable around her, so they pushed her out. They pushed me out. We found each other and became friends. And one night, Todd came home from picking up our daughter Emma from gymnastics, and he said, "Your friend is kind of making me a little bit uncomfortable. She says things I'm not really sure how to take, and I don't think that it's appropriate, and I'm just registering it with you." And I was like, "You think my friend is into you?" "Oh, she's definitely not into you. Don't worry, honey. That's not that true." Which he was mildly offended. And then a few weeks later, it was Valentine's Day, and he came home and he said, "She made me a card, Beth," which Valentine's Day in Spanish is called the Day of Friendship and Love. And I said, "Oh, it's the Dia de Amor y Amistad. You're her friend. She doesn't have that many friends. Of course she made you a card. She knew she was going to see you. It's nothing, I promise." He's like, "I don't know. It doesn't feel like nothing." I'm like, "I promise she's not into you." And then a few weeks later, she had learned what his routine was. And usually before he would go to the gym, he would go to a nearby hardware store to buy whatever we needed that day for the orphanages. And so she followed him into the parking lot of that hardware store. And when he got out of the car, she made it very clear in no uncertain terms what it is that she wanted to do and how it was that she was dressed underneath her jacket. And so that man got in that car and turned around and drove straight home. He totally forgot my daughter at the gym. He just drove straight home. Walked in the door and told me what was going on. And I was like, okay, I don't know what to do. I don't even know what the right thing to do is. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to do. We got to go back and get Emma. I know that much. But beyond that, do you go? Do I go? Do we go together? Do we talk to her? Do we not talk to her? Like, what is the way? Like, what is God's way? And after we talked about it for a minute and prayed, I said to him, "I think we need to go back together, and I think I need to talk to her." And he was like, "Oh, you want to talk to her? Like, what are you going to say?" And I said, I think I'll know it when I get there." And he's like, You're not going to hit her or anything, right?" And I was like, "Of course I'm not going to hit her." We pull up into the gym, and we both get out of the car together, and she was immediately taken back by the fact that we were together there. And as I walked up to her, she was very humiliated by her actions.